The surveillance drone feed flickered across 6 different screens in the operations center, each one showing the same nightmare from a different angle. A Marine platoon, call sign Reaper 6, was pinned down in a valley that had no name on any map but would be remembered by everyone watching. 38 Marines, 300 meters of open ground, and an enemy force that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The Taliban fighters had turned the valley into a killing field with precision that spoke of weeks of preparation. Machine gun nests carved into the ridgeline, mortars positioned in defilade, sniper hides that commanded every approach. The Marines had walked into it during what was supposed to be a routine patrol, and now they were dying. 2 medevac birds had already been turned back by ground fire so intense it shredded their rotors before they could even establish a hover. The Apache gunships circling overhead were Winchester, out of ammunition, and their fuel gauges were kissing empty. The AC-130 gunship that could have ended this in minutes was grounded 300 miles away with a hydraulic failure. And the fast movers, the F-16s and F-15Es that could have turned the ridgeline into a parking lot, couldn't get clearance to drop because the Marines were too close to the enemy positions. Danger close had become danger impossible. In the operations center, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hendricks stood with his hands pressed flat against the tactical display table, watching the blue icons that represented his Marines blink with a steadiness that felt obscene. Each blink was a heartbeat. Each second without air support was another man bleeding out in the dust. His air controller, Captain Torres, had the radio handset pressed so hard against his ear it was leaving a mark. Reaper 6, be advised all available assets are Winchester or Bingo fuel. We're working the problem. The response came back through static and the unmistakable percussion of incoming rounds. Copy that, Warhammer, but we don't have time for problems. We need guns now or start counting body bags. Hendricks closed his eyes. In 23 years of service, he'd never felt this helpless. Then Torres straightened suddenly, pressing his headset tighter. Sir, we've got an emergency check-in. Single A-10, call sign Reaper 9, inbound from Bagram. Pilot says she heard the tactical frequency and is volunteering for immediate tasking. Hendricks opened his eyes. Flight time, 14 minutes. Loadout, full combat load. 500 rounds, 30 Mike, 6 AGM-65 Mavericks, 2 rocket pods, and a full defensive suite. For the first time in 30 minutes, Hendricks felt something other than dread, but Torres was frowning at his screen. Sir, there's something else. Reaper 9 is a solo flight, no wingman, and according to the database the pilot is, he paused, Captain Alina Volkov. She's been flying admin missions out of Bagram for 8 months, personnel transfers, cargo runs, VIP transport. The brass had exiled her there after what they called the incident, though nobody ever said that part out loud. What they meant was that Captain Alina Volkov had embarrassed them, not through incompetence or cowardice, but through competence so undeniable it had exposed their own failures. 2 years ago, she'd been flying combat missions in Iraq when her 4-ship formation had walked into an ambush. The mission commander, a full colonel with 20 years in fighters, had frozen on the radio. For 45 seconds that felt like forever, he'd simply stopped transmitting, while enemy AAA turned the sky into a light show. It was Volkov who'd taken tactical command without asking permission, who'd coordinated the defensive split that got everyone out alive, who'd then put 2 GBU-12s through the windows of the insurgent command post with the kind of precision that made grown men weep. The problem was that the colonel had been 2 months from retirement and the son of a 3-star general. Making him look incompetent, even by saving lives, was the kind of sin the Air Force didn't forgive in junior officers, especially not in junior officers who were women, and refused to apologize for being better at their jobs than their commanders. So they'd banished her to Bagram, where she'd spent 8 months flying cargo planes and trying not to think about what she'd trained her entire life to do. But exile has a way of sharpening hunger. Torres was still waiting, his expression uncertain. In the background, the radio crackled with another transmission from Reaper 6. Warhammer, we've got multiple casualties. I need that air support yesterday. Hendricks didn't hesitate. Tell Reaper 9 she's cleared hot. Get her on tactical frequency and give her everything we've got. Target coordinates, friendly positions, threat assessment, the works. Sir, she hasn't flown combat in 2 years. Shouldn't we, Captain Torres? Hendricks's voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Right now, an admin pilot in an A-10 is the best option those Marines have. Possibly the only option. So unless you've got a better idea, I suggest you get her on station and let her do her job. Torres nodded and began transmitting. Across the operations center, every controller had stopped what they were doing. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Either this was a miracle or a catastrophe, and there wouldn't be anything in between. 14 minutes might as well have been 14 hours. But then, cutting through the static and chaos, a new voice emerged on the tactical frequency. It was calm, almost conversational, like she was ordering coffee instead of flying into hell. Warhammer, Reaper 9 checking in on tactical. I've got your position, I've got your friendlies, and I've got 14,000 pounds of hate looking for a home. Tell me where you want it. The A-10 Thunderbolt appeared over the valley ridgeline like something conjured from smoke and prayer. At 400 knots and 8,000 feet, it wasn't graceful. The A-10 had never been designed for grace. It had been designed to deliver violence with surgical precision, and everything about its profile announced that intention. The titanium bathtub surrounding the cockpit. The massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon slung beneath the fuselage like the main gun of a tank. The angular wings mounted high on the body, each one carrying enough ordnance to level a city block. Even at altitude, it looked exactly like what it was. A gun with wings attached as an afterthought. Alina Volkov sat in the cockpit with the kind of stillness that came from absolute focus. Her hands on the stick and throttle moved with micro-adjustments so subtle they barely registered, but each one kept her exactly where she needed to be in the sky. 2 years of flying straight lines in peaceful airspace fell away like a shed skin. This was what her body remembered. In her headset, the tactical frequency was organized chaos. The forward air controller on the ground was walking her through the threat picture with clipped professionalism, but underneath his words Alina could hear what he wasn't saying. The desperation. The knowledge that men were dying while he talked. Reaper 9, be advised you've got multiple gun positions along the eastern ridgeline, grid reference 429er, 678. Machine guns, probable RPGs, and we're taking effective sniper fire from elevated positions. Danger close on all approaches. Friendlies are in the valley floor behind the wrecked MRAP. How copy? Alina's eyes swept the terrain below, processing information faster than conscious thought. The burned-out MRAP was a dark scar against the pale dirt. Behind it, she could see the Marines' tiny figures pressed against whatever cover they could find. And along the ridgeline, exactly where the controller had indicated, she caught the telltale flash of muzzle fire. Solid copy, Warhammer. I've got the friendlies. I've got the targets. Recommend I take the northern approach, roll in from the high ground, and work the ridgeline from north to south. That'll put the sun at my back and keep my flight path perpendicular to your position. Minimize the chance of errant rounds walking toward the good guys. There was a pause. Then from the operations center, Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks's voice. Reaper 9, confirm you're planning a gun run at danger close distance. Alina smiled, though no one could see it. Sir, the A-10's entire purpose is danger close. The cannon is accurate to within 5 feet at this range. I'll keep it tight. Another pause. Longer this time, then, cleared hot, Reaper 9, God be with you. Appreciate that, sir. But I brought my own gods. She rolled the aircraft inverted and pulled, bleeding altitude in a diving turn that would have torn the wings off anything less durable. The world became geometry and physics. Angle of attack, closure rate, wind direction, target acquisition. Alina's eyes tracked across the ridgeline, and her brain translated terrain into tactical math. The machine gun nests were dug in good, but whoever had positioned them had made one critical mistake. They'd arranged them in a line, one after another, probably to create overlapping fields of fire against anyone approaching from the valley floor. What they hadn't planned for was someone approaching from above and behind. Alina armed the GAU-8 Avenger cannon with a thumb switch that felt as natural as breathing. The trigger beneath her index finger was smooth, worn by 1,000 training runs, but this wasn't training. The A-10's computer systems fed her targeting information in a steady stream. Range to target, 1,800 meters and falling. Airspeed, 420 knots. Descent rate, 3,000 feet per minute. All of it was right at the edge of the envelope, the kind of approach that looked suicidal from the ground but made perfect sense from the cockpit. Below, the Marines were still taking fire. She could see tracer rounds stitching the dirt around their position. One of the blue icons on her display had stopped moving. The radio crackled. Reaper 9 Warhammer, be advised the enemy has marked your approach. We're seeing movement along the ridgeline. They know you're coming. Good, Alina said quietly. Let them watch. At 1,200 meters, she centered the gun cross on the first machine gun position. The 30mm cannon was already spooled up, its 7 barrels rotating at over 4,000 RPM. When she pressed the trigger, the sound was like the universe tearing in half. BRRRRRRRRRT. The iconic sound of the GAU-8 wasn't really a sound at all. It was a physical force that rattled teeth and stopped hearts. 65 rounds of depleted uranium tore through the air at 3,400 feet per second, each one carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through armored vehicles. The machine gun nest disintegrated. Not destroyed, disintegrated. One moment it was there, sandbags and steel and human beings. The next moment it was component atoms and pink mist. Alina walked the gun along the ridgeline with tiny adjustments of her wrist, and everywhere the cannon touched, the earth opened up. The second position, the third, the fourth, she could see enemy fighters scrambling, running, trying to reposition. It didn't matter. At this range, the A-10's cannon was absolute. It was physics made manifest. The run lasted 7 seconds. When Alina pulled up and banked hard left, the ridgeline was silent. The operations center had gone quiet too. Then, cutting through the silence, a new voice on the tactical frequency. Young, shaking, alive. Warhammer Reaper 6. I don't know what the hell that was, but tell your pilot we're clear. Repeat, we are clear. Taking no further fire from the eastern ridge. Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks leaned against the display table, something like awe in his expression. Alina climbed back to altitude and circled the valley with the methodical patience of a surgeon checking her work. The eastern ridgeline was silent, but silence didn't mean safe. It meant waiting. Below, the Marines were beginning to move, pulling casualties behind cover, establishing a defensive perimeter. They moved with the jerky urgency of men who'd been given a temporary reprieve but knew the hammer could fall again at any moment. She was right. The forward air controller's voice crackled through her headset with new urgency. Reaper 9 Warhammer, we've got movement on the western ridge. Multiple dismounts with RPGs. Looks like they're trying to flank the friendly position. Grid reference 427681. Alina banked hard, her eyes already scanning the new threat sector. She found them immediately, a squad of fighters moving through broken ground with practiced speed. They weren't running blindly. They were executing a coordinated maneuver, using the terrain to mask their approach. These weren't random insurgents. These were fighters who'd done this before. Warhammer Reaper 9, I've got eyes on. Count 7 dismounts with probable RPGs and small arms. They're 200 meters from the friendly position and closing. I'm rolling in with Mavericks. The AGM-65 Maverick was a different kind of weapon than the cannon. Where the GAU-8 was precision through volume, the Maverick was precision through guidance. Each missile carried a TV seeker head that could distinguish between a truck and a person at maximum range. Alina selected the first missile, locked the seeker onto the lead element of the enemy squad, and waited for the tone that meant perfect acquisition. The tone came. She squeezed the trigger. The Maverick dropped off the rail with a solid thunk, its rocket motor igniting a heartbeat later. From the cockpit, Alina watched the missile's contrail arc across the sky like the finger of God pointing at exactly where judgment would fall. The explosion was precise and devastating. The lead fighters simply ceased to exist. The survivors scattered, abandoning their assault and running for whatever cover they could find. But running didn't help. Alina was already locking the second missile. Warhammer Reaper 9, Splash 1. Engaging remaining targets. The second Maverick found its mark 20 seconds later. Then the third. Elena worked with the cold efficiency of someone performing a job she'd trained for thousands of hours to do. No wasted movement, no hesitation, just the steady application of overwhelming force against an enemy who'd made the fatal mistake of threatening her brothers in arms. When the last missile struck, the western ridge fell silent. In the operations center, Captain Torres was staring at his display with something approaching disbelief. "Sir, she just neutralized 14 enemy combatants in under 3 minutes. Perfect precision strikes. Zero collateral damage." Hendricks nodded slowly. "What's her fuel state?" Elena checked her gauges. The combat maneuvering had burned fuel faster than cruise flight, and the missiles had lightened her load, changing her aircraft's handling characteristics. But the math was simple enough. "Warhammer Reaper 9, I've got 40 minutes of playtime remaining. I'm staying on station until someone tells me to leave or my wings fall off, whichever comes first." There was a pause. Then Hendricks's voice, quieter than before. "Copy that, Reaper 9. We're tracking 3 additional enemy positions: Northern Ridge, Southern Approach, and a possible mortar team in the tree line to the east. The Marines are working on casualty evacuation, but they're not mobile yet. We need you to keep the bad guys' heads down." "Understood. I'll make myself useful." For the next 30 minutes, Elena Volkov transformed the valley into her personal no-fly zone for anyone who didn't wear an American flag. When the enemy mortar team tried to reposition, she put a 2-second burst from the cannon through their position that left nothing but smoking craters. When fighters on the northern ridge attempted to establish a new machine gun nest, she scattered them with a rocket pod strike that turned their cover into shrapnel. She didn't showboat, didn't waste ammunition. Every trigger pull was calculated. Every pass was deliberate. The A-10 might have been ugly, but in her hands it moved through the sky with a terrible grace, like a predator that knew exactly how dangerous it was and felt no need to prove it. On the ground, the Marines had stopped seeing her as just air support. She'd become something more: a guardian angel with titanium armor and a 30mm halo. Every time the A-10's engines rumbled overhead, they relaxed fractionally. Not because the danger was gone, but because they knew someone was watching. Someone who was very, very good at her job. The forward air controller, a young Marine sergeant named Diaz, had been coordinating air support for 3 years. He'd worked with everyone: Navy F-18s, Air Force F-16s, Marine Harriers. Some pilots were great, some were adequate, some were cowboys who scared him more than the enemy, but he'd never worked with anyone like this. "Reaper 9, Warhammer, the Marines want me to pass along a message. They say you're invited to the first round when they get back to base. Also, Reaper 6 wants to know your call sign origin." Elena smiled. Her call sign, Reaper 9, had a story, but it wasn't one the Air Force liked to publicize. The number 9 came from the fact that she'd been the 9th member of her pilot training class, dead last in the initial rankings because her instructors had assumed she'd wash out. Women always did, they'd figured. Too emotional, not aggressive enough, couldn't handle the pressure. But she'd finished first in her class. Top scores in academics, top scores in flight performance, top scores in weapons employment. And when someone had suggested changing her call sign to something more flattering, she'd refused. The number 9 had become a reminder, not just for her but for everyone who doubted her. It meant that being underestimated was an advantage if you were smart enough to use it. It meant that last could become first if you refused to quit. And most importantly, it meant that the opinions of people who'd never proven themselves in combat were worth exactly nothing. "Warhammer Reaper 9. Tell Reaper 6 the call sign is personal, but if he's buying the first round, I'll tell him the story." In the operations center, Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks was reviewing the gun camera footage from Elena's attacks. Each clip showed the same thing: perfect weapons employment executed with a calmness that bordered on supernatural. No panic, no hesitation, just a pilot doing exactly what she'd been trained to do. Captain Torres leaned over his shoulder. "Sir, I pulled her file. Her efficiency ratings are off the charts. So are her flight evaluation scores. Why the hell is she flying admin missions?" Hendricks didn't look away from the screen, because 2 years ago she made a colonel look bad by being better at his job than he was, and the Air Force has a long memory when it comes to wounded egos. That's insane. That's politics. Torres shook his head. Well, after today, there's no way they keep her benched. She just saved 38 Marines. That's not something you can bury in a file. Hendricks finally looked up. His expression was complicated, part admiration, part anger at the system that had wasted this pilot's talents for 2 years. You'd think so, but I've been doing this long enough to know that competence doesn't always win. Sometimes it just makes you a threat to people who value control more than results. Before Torres could respond, the tactical frequency erupted with new traffic. Warhammer, Reaper 6, we've got a technical approaching from the south, moving fast. Armed with what looks like a DSHK heavy machine gun. We're trying to reposition, but we've got wounded, we can't move quickly. Elena had already spotted it. The technical, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, was racing across the valley floor, kicking up a plume of dust. The gunner was traversing the weapon, preparing to open fire on the exposed Marines. This wasn't just another target. This was seconds away from becoming a massacre. Warhammer, Reaper 9. I've got the technical, rolling in. She didn't have time for a careful approach. The technical was less than 400 meters from the Marines and closing fast. Elena rolled inverted, pulled hard, and dove. The A-10 fell from the sky like a dropped anvil, accelerating past 450 knots. The world compressed into pure focus. The technical grew in her windscreen. The gunner saw her coming and tried to swing the DSHK around, but physics was against him. Elena centered the gun cross and pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 cannon spoke again, and the technical disappeared in a cloud of fire and shrapnel. One moment it was a threat, the next it was debris. Elena pulled up hard, the G-forces pressing her into her seat as the A-10 climbed back to altitude. The wings groaned but held. They always held. That was the magic of the A-10. It was built to take damage and keep flying. Built to absorb punishment that would destroy any other aircraft. Built fundamentally to protect the people on the ground who were trying to do impossible things in impossible places. Warhammer, Reaper 6, technical is destroyed. I don't know what we did to deserve this level of coverage, but please tell your pilot she just saved our asses. Again. Elena checked her fuel gauge. 10 minutes remaining. Not enough for another sustained engagement, but enough to make sure the Marines got out. Warhammer, Reaper 9, fuel state is getting critical. I need to know the status on the medevac birds. Reaper 9, Warhammer, medevac is inbound, ETA 6 minutes. Can you stay on station until they're clear? Elena did the math in her head. She'd have about 3 minutes of fuel remaining when the medevac arrived. Enough to make it back to Bagram if the winds were favorable and she flew the most efficient profile possible. No room for error, no margin for additional combat. Affirmative, Warhammer. I'll hold the door. The next 6 minutes were the longest of her life. Not because of danger. The enemy had learned their lesson and gone to ground. But because she was flying on borrowed time with borrowed fuel. Every second brought her closer to the critical fuel state where she'd have to choose between abandoning the Marines and risking a flameout over hostile territory. She chose to ignore the choice entirely and focused on staying exactly where she needed to be. Finally, blessedly, the medevac helicopters appeared on the horizon, 2 Black Hawks flying low and fast. Elena established radio contact and coordinated a safe approach corridor, making one final pass over the valley to ensure no hidden threats remained. The helicopters touched down and the Marines moved with practiced efficiency. Casualties loaded first, walking wounded next, everyone accounted for, everyone coming home. When the Black Hawks lifted off, Elena felt something unlock in her chest. Not relief, the mission wasn't over yet, but acknowledgement she'd done what she'd come to do. Reaper 9, Warhammer, medevac is clear and en route. You are released from station. Safe flight home. Copy that, Warhammer. Reaper 9 is Winchester and Bingo fuel heading home. But before she could turn for Bagram, another voice came through on the tactical frequency. Reaper 9, this is Reaper 6 actual. The Marine lieutenant who'd been commanding the ground force. His voice was rough with emotion. I've been doing this for 5 years. I've worked with a lot of pilots, but I've never seen anything like what you just did. You didn't just save lives today. You gave us hope when we had none. So from me and every Marine in this valley, thank you. We owe you everything." Alina didn't respond immediately. For 2 years, she'd flown admin missions in silence, watching other pilots get the combat assignments she trained for. For 2 years, she'd wondered if she'd ever get the chance to do her job again. For 2 years, the Air Force had told her, implicitly and explicitly, that her competence was less valuable than institutional comfort. And now, in the span of 45 minutes, she'd remembered why none of that mattered. The gratitude of the men on the ground. The knowledge that her skills had meant the difference between life and death. The certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was born to do. Reaper 6, Reaper 9. It was an honor to fight for you. Get your men home safe. She turned the A-10 toward Bagram and began the long glide home, running the most efficient flight profile she could manage with fuel gauges that were no longer measuring fuel so much as fumes and faith. The operations center tracked her progress in silence. Everyone knew she was cutting it razor thin. At 10 miles out, her fuel warning light illuminated. At 5 miles, the engine temperature began to climb. At 3 miles, Captain Tor stopped watching his screen and started praying. Alina put the A-10 down on Bagram's runway with the kind of precision that made it look easy, even though she was flying a 30,000-pound aircraft with engines that were seconds away from flaming out. The landing was smooth, professional, perfect. When the wheels touched tarmac, she had enough fuel remaining to taxi to the ramp and shut down, probably, maybe. The engines kept running until she completed the shutdown checklist, and then, finally, mercifully, everything went quiet. Alina sat in the cockpit for a long moment, her hands still on the stick and throttle, her body processing the transition from combat focus to safety. Her heart rate was elevated but steady. Her breathing was controlled. She wasn't shaking. Fighter pilots didn't shake. They just held it together until they were alone, and then they fell apart in privacy. But when she climbed down from the cockpit and her boots touched the ramp, she wasn't alone. A crowd had formed. Maintenance crews, other pilots, support staff. Everyone who'd been monitoring the tactical frequency. Everyone who'd heard what she'd done. They weren't cheering. That would have been inappropriate. But they were watching with the kind of respect that didn't need to be vocalized. One of the maintenance chiefs, a grizzled master sergeant named Patterson who'd been turning wrenches on A-10 since before Alina was born, walked up to her with a tablet in his hand. "Captain Volkov, I need you to sign off on the aircraft status." Alina took the tablet, expecting the routine post-flight inspection checklist. Instead, Patterson had written a single sentence. "This aircraft just saved 38 lives. Recommend immediate service to prepare for next mission." She looked up at him. Patterson's face was carefully neutral, but his eyes told the whole story. "I'll get her ready, ma'am, whatever you need." The debriefing happened 3 hours later in a conference room that smelled like bad coffee and stale air. Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks had flown in from the operations center specifically to conduct it personally, which was unusual. Debriefings were normally handled by squadron-level officers. The presence of a full colonel suggested this was about more than just reviewing tactics and procedures. Alina sat alone on one side of the table, still wearing her flight suit. Across from her, Hendricks reviewed a thick folder that she recognized as her personnel file. He read in silence for several minutes while Alina waited with the patience of someone who'd learned that waiting was part of the job. Finally, Hendricks looked up. "Captain Volkov, I've been in the Air Force for 23 years. I've coordinated air support for hundreds of ground operations, and what you did today ranks in the top 3 most impressive displays of combat aviation I've ever witnessed. Your weapons employment was flawless, your situational awareness was exceptional, and your decision to stay on station at critical fuel state showed the kind of judgment that should be taught at the academy." He paused, and Alina recognized the rhythm of a conversation that was about to pivot. "That being said, I need to understand something. You volunteered for immediate tasking without clearance from your squadron commander. You diverted from your assigned flight path without authorization. and you committed to an engagement profile that violated several standing orders regarding solo operations in contested airspace. So before I write my after-action report, I need to hear your explanation. Why did you do it? Alina met his eyes. This was the moment where she was supposed to demonstrate remorse, express understanding of the importance of the chain of command, acknowledge that procedures existed for good reasons, all the political theater that kept the machine running smoothly. Instead, she told the truth. Sir, I did it because 38 Marines were going to die if I didn't. The rulebook doesn't have a contingency plan for that scenario, so I made a choice. Maybe it was the wrong choice from an administrative perspective, but from a moral perspective, it was the only choice. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. That's a dangerous philosophy, Captain. If every pilot decided to ignore orders whenever they disagreed with them, we'd have chaos. With respect, sir, I didn't ignore orders. I was never ordered not to help. I was simply never assigned the mission. There's a difference. A semantic difference. Maybe, but semantics matter when men are dying. Hendricks studied her for a long moment. Then he closed the folder and pushed it aside. Off the record, Captain, you did the right thing today. Not the politically convenient thing, not the career-smart thing, but the right thing. And those 38 Marines are alive because you were willing to take that risk. The praise should have felt good. Instead, Alina felt the weight of 2 years of exile pressing down. Sir, with respect, if I did the right thing today, why was I prevented from doing it for the past 24 months? I've been flying admin missions while pilots with half my flight hours were getting combat assignments. Not because I lacked skill, not because I lacked courage, but because I embarrassed someone who mattered more than the mission. Hendricks's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You know I can't comment on personnel decisions made above my pay grade. I'm not asking you to comment. I'm asking you to acknowledge the reality. The Air Force punished me for being good at my job. And while I was being punished, how many other emergencies happened that I could have responded to? How many other situations where my skills might have made a difference? The silence stretched out. Lena knew she was pushing too hard, saying things that could end her career. But after today, after remembering what it felt like to actually do the job she'd sacrificed everything to master, she couldn't pretend anymore. Hendricks finally spoke. Captain, I'm going to give you some advice that you're free to ignore. The Air Force is a large organization. It moves slowly. It protects itself. And sometimes it makes decisions that prioritize politics over performance. That's not right. It's not fair. It's reality. He leaned forward. However, reality can change. What you did today is going to generate reports. Those reports are going to be read by people who make decisions, and those people are going to ask questions about why a pilot of your caliber was flying cargo runs instead of combat missions. I can't promise anything, but I can promise that your exile is over. Alina felt something dangerous flicker in her chest. Hope. Sir, I appreciate that, but I've heard promises before. This isn't a promise, it's an observation. The Marine lieutenant whose platoon you saved, his father is a 3-star general, the kind of 3-star general who doesn't forget when someone saves his son's life, the kind who makes phone calls, the kind who asks uncomfortable questions about personnel assignments. Hendricks stood, gathering his folder. You're going to receive orders in the next 72 hours. I don't know what they'll say. But I'd recommend you stop thinking about admin missions and start thinking about where you actually want to be. He walked to the door, then paused. Off the record, Captain, the Air Force failed you. We took one of our best pilots and benched her because someone's ego was more important than mission readiness. That's unacceptable, and if my recommendations carry any weight, it won't happen again. After he left, Alina sat alone in the conference room for a long time. Outside, the sun was setting over Bagram, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. The orders arrived 36 hours later, delivered by a young administrative sergeant who looked simultaneously impressed and intimidated. Alina signed for the envelope and waited until the sergeant left before opening it. Inside was a single page on official Air Force letterhead. The text was bureaucratic and formal, the kind of language designed to obscure meaning while conveying authority. But the essential message was clear. Captain Alina Volkov was being reassigned effective immediately to the 442nd Fighter Wing, operating out of Kandahar Air Base. Combat operations, full tactical authority, no administrative duties. She read the orders 3 times looking for the catch. There had to be a catch. The Air Force didn't simply reverse 2 years of exile because of a single mission, no matter how successful. But the orders were legitimate, signed by a 2-star general she'd never met. At the bottom, in a section marked Additional Comments, someone had added a handwritten note. "We need our best pilots where they can do the most good. Welcome back to the fight." Alina folded the orders carefully and placed them in her personal effects bag. Then she walked outside into the harsh Afghan sunlight and looked up at the sky. For 2 years, she'd been grounded in every way that mattered. For 2 years, she'd watched other pilots fly the missions she'd trained for while she ferried cargo and wondered if she'd ever get another chance. The doubt had been corrosive. Not enough to make her quit. She'd never been a quitter, but enough to make her question whether competence actually mattered in an organization that seemed to value conformity more than capability. Today, the doubt was gone. She'd proven to herself, if no one else, that the skills were still there. That 2 years of exile hadn't dulled the edge. That when it mattered, when lives hung in the balance, she could still be the pilot she'd trained her entire adult life to become. The walk to the flight line was familiar. She'd made it hundreds of times over the past 8 months, always heading toward cargo planes and admin runs. But this time felt different. This time, she walked with the certainty of someone who'd earned her place. The A-10 she'd flown yesterday was still on the ramp, surrounded by maintenance crews. Master Sergeant Patterson was overseeing the inspection personally, his experienced eyes checking every panel, every system, every component. He saw Alina approaching and walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. "Captain, your bird's in good shape. We'll have her ready for the next mission by tomorrow morning." Alina nodded. "Actually, Sergeant, she's not my bird anymore. I'm being reassigned to Kandahar." Patterson's eyebrows rose. "Combat operations. Combat operations." For the first time in their acquaintance, Patterson smiled. It transformed his grizzled face into something almost warm. "About damn time, ma'am. Begging your pardon, but watching you fly cargo was like watching a surgeon deliver mail. Waste of talent." The flight to Kandahar took 3 hours aboard a C-130 that shook like it was falling apart, and probably was. Alina sat in the cargo bay surrounded by equipment and supplies, her helmet bag on her lap, her thoughts somewhere between reflection and anticipation. The other passengers, mostly Army personnel heading to forward operating bases, left her alone. The flight suit and the quiet competence she radiated created a natural barrier that people instinctively respected. She spent the flight reviewing tactical publications on her tablet, refreshing her memory on threat assessments and engagement profiles. 2 years was a long time. The enemy adapted. Tactics evolved. She needed to be ready. When the C-130 touched down at Kandahar, Alina grabbed her gear and walked down the ramp into organized chaos. Kandahar was 10 times the size of Bagram, a sprawling complex of runways and hangars and operations centers that never stopped moving. This wasn't a support base. This was a war-fighting platform. The 442nd Fighter Wing Operations Center was a low concrete building reinforced against rocket attacks. Inside, the air was cool and hummed with the sound of computers and radio traffic. Alina reported to the duty officer, presented her orders, and was directed to the wing commander's office. Colonel Sarah Chen was a legend in the fighter community. She'd been flying A-10s for 18 years and had more combat hours than most pilots had total flight time. Her office walls were covered with photographs, combat missions, squadron deployments, ceremonies, each one telling a story of service. Chen looked up when Alina entered and gestured to a chair. "Captain Volkov, I've been reading about you. Impressive performance at Bagram." "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet. You're here because we need experienced pilots who can handle high-threat environments with minimal support. The next few months are going to test everything you've got. You comfortable with that?" Alina met Chen's eyes. "Ma'am, I've spent 2 years being comfortable. I'm ready to be useful." Chen smiled slightly. "Good answer. I'm assigning you to the 74th Fighter Squadron. They operate primarily in Helmand Province. High enemy activity, complex terrain, danger-close missions almost daily. Your squadron commander is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Wade. He's aggressive, he's smart, and he expects perfection. You'll fit right in. She handed Alina a folder. Your flight schedule starts tomorrow. Tonight, get settled, meet your squadron mates, and rest. You're going to need it. Alina took the folder and stood, but before she could leave, Chen spoke again. Captain, I know your history. I know why you were at Bagram, and I want you to understand something. In my wing, competence is the only currency that matters. I don't care about politics or egos or who you made look bad 2 years ago. I care about whether you can put ordnance on target and bring your aircraft home. Everything else is noise. Clear. Crystal clear, ma'am. Outstanding. Welcome to the fight. The 74th Fighter Squadron occupied a corner of the flight line that looked like organized chaos, but operated with the precision of a Swiss watch. A-10s lined the ramp, each one surrounded by maintenance crews and ground equipment. The air smelled like jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, and the particular kind of dust that got into everything in Afghanistan. Alina found the Squadron Operations Center and introduced herself to the operations officer, a major named Castillo who looked her up and down with the frank assessment of someone evaluating a new piece of equipment. Volkov, I heard about Bagram. Hell of a way to announce you're back in the game. Wasn't trying to announce anything, sir. Just did the job. Well, the job you did saved a lot of lives and made a lot of people notice. Wade's expecting you in the briefing room in 20 minutes. Suggest you don't be late. The briefing room was small and crowded with pilots in various states of readiness. Some were suiting up for missions. Others were reviewing targeting materials or catching sleep in chairs that had seen better days. Alina found an empty seat in the back and waited. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Wade entered exactly at the scheduled time, moving with the controlled energy of someone who never wasted emotion. He was younger than Alina expected, maybe 40, with the lean build of a distance runner and eyes that never stopped calculating. All right, listen up. We've got 3 missions tasking today. Alpha Flight, you're supporting a Marine push into Marja. High enemy activity expected, bring full combat loads. Bravo Flight, you're on standby for CAS support in Sangin. Charlie Flight, you're running armed reconnaissance in the Arghandab Valley. Questions. A few pilots asked technical questions about loadouts and coordination. Wade answered each with detailed precision that showed he'd done this hundreds of times. When the briefing ended, Wade caught Alina's eye. Volkov, my office, now. His office was barely larger than a closet, crammed with maps and flight publications, and a desk that looked like a tactical operations center. Wade closed the door and gestured to the only other chair. I pulled your training records. You were top of your class in weapons employment, top 5% in tactical decision-making. Flight evaluators said you had the best situational awareness they'd seen in years. So explain to me why you spent 2 years flying admin missions. Alina had prepared for this question. I made someone with stars on their shoulders look incompetent by being better at the job than they were. The Air Force decided that was a more serious problem than wasting my skills. Wade studied her for a long moment. That's a bitter way to frame it. It's an accurate way to frame it. Fair enough. Wade leaned back in his chair. Here's the situation. I've got 12 pilots in this squadron. Every single one of them is good, but good isn't enough in Helmand Province. The enemy we're facing isn't random insurgents with AK-47s. They're trained, disciplined fighters who have been conducting asymmetric warfare for 20 years. They know how to use terrain. They know how to mass fires, and they know how to kill Americans. Wade pulled up a map on his computer and rotated it so Alina could see. We fly missions here, here, and here, every single day. Sometimes 3 times a day. Danger close is the norm, not the exception. Our average distance from friendly forces during gun runs is 50 meters. 50. That's closer than most people park their cars. He looked at Alina directly. I need pilots who can operate in that environment without supervision, who can make split-second decisions when the ground commander is screaming for help and the enemy is 100 meters away, who can put 30-millimeter rounds exactly where they need to go and nowhere else. Based on what you did at Bagram, I think you can do that, but I need to know if you agree. Alina didn't hesitate. I can do that, sir. Good, because starting tomorrow you're going to prove it. I'm putting you on Alpha Flight. You'll be flying wing for Captain Harrison. He's been here 6 months and knows the terrain. Learn from him, watch how he works. And when you're ready, I'll give you your own flight lead responsibilities. Wade stood, indicating the conversation was over. One more thing, Volkov. I don't care what happened 2 years ago. I don't care about politics or who you pissed off. In my squadron, the only thing that matters is whether you can do the job. So leave the baggage at the door and focus on the mission. Clear? Yes, sir. Outstanding. Briefing for tomorrow's mission is at 0500. Don't be late. Alina left the office and walked back to the flight line. The sun was setting, turning the mountains to the east into dark silhouettes against an orange sky. Somewhere out there, American forces were engaged in the endless chess game of counterinsurgency, and starting tomorrow she'd be part of it again, for real this time, not as punishment or exile but as a fully integrated member of a combat squadron. The thought should have been intimidating. Instead, it felt like coming home. She spent the evening reviewing tactical publications and studying maps of Helmand Province. The terrain was brutal. A mix of mountains, valleys, and urban areas where the enemy could hide and maneuver with impunity. The kind of environment where a single mistake could cost lives. Alina memorized key terrain features, studied threat assessments, and reviewed the tactical frequencies she'd need to monitor. By the time she collapsed into her bunk at midnight, her mind was full of coordinates and procedures and contingency plans. She fell asleep immediately and dreamed of flying. The alarm went off at 4:30, which barely counted as morning. Alina was dressed and ready by 4:45, her helmet bag packed and her flight suit crisp despite 2 years of storage. The briefing room was already full when she arrived. Alpha Flight consisted of 4 aircraft, 2 pairs flying in mutual support. Captain Harrison was the flight lead, a stocky pilot with a Missouri accent and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen everything. His wingman was Captain Torres, who Alina recognized from his voice, the forward air controller from Bagram who'd coordinated her gun runs. He nodded when he saw her, a gesture of recognition and respect. The other element consisted of Captain Lee and Captain Brooks, both experienced pilots who moved with the comfortable efficiency of people who'd done this mission a dozen times. Wade ran the briefing with military precision. The mission was straightforward in concept but complex in execution. Provide close air support for a marine company conducting a clearing operation in a village suspected of being a Taliban stronghold. Expected enemy resistance, significant. Expected friendly casualties, likely. Expected margin for error, 0. Rules of engagement are standard. Positive identification required before engaging. Friendlies will be marked with IR strobes and colored smoke. Expected threats include small arms, RPGs, possible MANPADS, and heavy machine guns. The village has civilian population, so collateral damage concerns are high. Questions? Torres raised his hand. What's the extract plan if things go sideways? Marines have 2 QRF elements on standby. Medevac is prepositioned 15 minutes out. If ground forces get pinned down, we're their primary fire support until the cavalry arrives, which means we need to be perfect. Wade looked directly at Alina. Volkov, you're flying as Brooks's wingman. Your job is to follow her lead, maintain position, and execute exactly as briefed. Think you can handle that? Yes, sir. Good. Step time is 0600. Weather is clear, winds light and variable. Let's make it a good day. The walk to the aircraft was quiet. Pilots didn't joke before missions. They saved their energy for the work ahead. Alina's A-10 was waiting on the ramp, fully armed and fueled. Master Sergeant Patterson's counterpart at Kandahar, a technical sergeant named Williams, was finishing the pre-flight inspection. Captain Volkov, she's ready to go. Full combat load, all systems green, bring her back in one piece. Alina conducted her walk-around with meticulous attention, checking every panel and surface. The A-10 looked ready to hunt. Climbing into the cockpit felt like putting on a familiar suit of armor. Everything was exactly where it should be. The instruments, the switches, the stick and throttle that responded to the lightest touch. Alina ran through her startup checklist with practiced efficiency, and within minutes the engines were spinning and the aircraft was alive. The tower cleared Alpha Flight for departure, and the four A-10s taxied to the runway in sequence. Alina fell into position behind Brooks, matching her movements with the precision of a shadow. When the tower gave the command, they accelerated down the runway and lifted off in pairs, the distinctive howl of the turbofan engines announcing their departure. The flight to the target area took 30 minutes, flying low over terrain that shifted from flat desert to broken hills to the green zone of the Helmand River Valley. Below, Afghanistan looked peaceful from altitude. The reality on the ground was different. The Marine Company was already in contact when Alpha Flight checked in on tactical frequency. The radio traffic was controlled but urgent, the kind of communication that indicated professionals dealing with a serious situation. Hawkeye, Sabre 6. We're taking effective fire from multiple positions inside the village. Request immediate air support, danger close. Harrison's voice was calm and measured. Sabre 6, Hawkeye 1-1. Flight of 4 A-10s checking in on station. We've got full combat loads and playtime for 90 minutes. Send your coordinates and mark your position. The forward air controller rattled off grid references and threat assessments. Alina's eyes tracked across her moving map display, correlating the verbal information with the visual terrain. The Marines were pinned down on the southern edge of the village, taking fire from compounds approximately 200 meters to their north. Harrison coordinated the attack sequence with Brooks, assigning sectors and establishing deconfliction procedures. Alina listened and learned, absorbing the rhythm of combat coordination. This wasn't training. This was the real thing with real bullets and real consequences. Hawkeye 1-3-1-1. You and your wingman take the eastern compound. We'll handle the western side. Remember, friendlies are 200 meters south. Keep your runs oriented north to south and watch your overshoot. Brooks acknowledged and banked into her attack run. Alina followed, maintaining position while her eyes scanned the target area. The compound looked like a dozen others: mud walls, flat roof, narrow windows. But this one was shooting at Americans. Brooks rolled in first, her A-10 diving toward the compound with controlled aggression. The GAU-8 spoke, and a section of the compound wall disintegrated. Alina watched her flight lead's technique: the angle of attack, the burst duration, the pull-up timing, perfect execution. Then it was her turn. Alina armed her cannon and rolled into the attack, her mind processing information faster than conscious thought. Airspeed, altitude, target acquisition. Friendly position, wind, everything aligned. She pressed the trigger. The world compressed into that eternal 2 seconds of violence. The cannon fired 65 rounds. Every single one struck exactly where she intended. The compound's firing position ceased to exist. Alina pulled up and climbed back to altitude, her heart rate barely elevated. That was the difference between training and experience. Training made you competent, but experience made you calm. Brooks's voice crackled through the radio. Nice shooting, Hawkeye 1-4. You're cleared for follow-up runs as needed. For the next hour, Alpha Flight worked the village with surgical precision. Every compound that showed enemy activity received attention. Every firing position was eliminated. The Marines advanced through the village with Alpha Flight overhead, providing the kind of air support that made ground combat survivable. Alina flew 5 more gun runs, each one executed with the same precision as the first. No wasted ammunition, no collateral damage, just the steady application of overwhelming firepower against an enemy that had made the mistake of shooting at Americans. By mid-morning, the village was secure. The Marines reported 12 enemy KIA, multiple weapons caches discovered, and most importantly, 0 friendly casualties. Sabre 6's voice came through the radio with undisguised gratitude. Hawkeye Flight, Sabre 6, we are secure and consolidated. Whatever they're paying you pilots, it's not enough. Outstanding support. Harrison acknowledged professionally, but Alina could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Sabre 6, Hawkeye, always a pleasure working with professionals. Stay safe down there. The flight back to Kandahar was quiet. Pilots didn't celebrate after missions. They saved that for the debriefing, if at all. but there was a palpable sense of satisfaction in the formation. They'd done their job, they'd done it well, and everyone was coming home. When Alina climbed down from her aircraft, Brooks was waiting. "Volkov, that was solid flying. You kept good formation discipline, your weapons employment was textbook, and you didn't do anything stupid. In my book, that's a successful first combat mission." "Thank you, ma'am." Brooks smiled slightly. "Don't thank me yet. Wade's going to work you hard. He doesn't believe in easing people in. But if you keep flying like that, you'll be flight lead inside a month." The debriefing was thorough and professional. Wade reviewed every aspect of the mission, praised what went well, and identified areas for improvement. When he got to Alina's performance, he simply said, "Volkov showed good judgment and excellent weapons employment. No safety violations, no procedural errors. She's cleared for continued combat operations." After the formal debriefing ended, Wade pulled Alina aside. "I watched your gun camera footage. You've got the touch. That's not something that can be taught. Some pilots are technicians who follow procedures. Others are artists who feel the aircraft. You're the latter. Keep it up." That night, Alina sat in the squadron bar, a plywood structure that served beer and hosted pilots who needed to decompress. She nursed a single drink and listened to the conversations swirling around her. These were her people now. The next 3 weeks established a rhythm that was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Alina flew combat missions almost daily, sometimes twice a day when the operational tempo demanded it. She worked close air support for Marines in Marja, armed reconnaissance in the Arghandab Valley, convoy escort through areas known for IED ambushes. Every mission was different. Every mission was dangerous. And every mission reinforced why she'd spent years training for this. The pilots of the 74th Fighter Squadron were exactly what Wade had promised, professionals who operated at the highest level. They welcomed Alina not because of her gender or her history, but because she could do the job. Because when the radio crackled with emergency calls for air support, she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. By the 3rd week, Wade cleared her for flight lead responsibilities. Her first mission leading a 2-ship element was another close air support tasking, this time supporting Army Rangers conducting a night raid on a Taliban command compound. The raid went perfectly until it didn't. 20 minutes into the operation, the Rangers hit unexpected resistance, a hidden bunker complex that hadn't shown up on any intelligence reports, heavy machine gun fire from elevated positions. The Ranger element was pinned down with casualties and couldn't maneuver. Alina arrived on station to chaos. The forward air controller was coordinating 3 different rescue elements while trying to direct her fires. The Rangers were taking casualties. The enemy was dug in and disciplined, and the compound was surrounded by civilian structures that absolutely could not be hit. She took a breath and imposed order on chaos. First, establish communications with all elements. Second, identify friendly positions with absolute certainty. Third, identify enemy positions. Fourth, develop a plan that would destroy the threat without endangering friendlies or civilians. The enemy bunker was carved into a hillside, positioned to command the entire approach to the compound. Attacking it with cannon fire risked hitting the Rangers. Attacking it with missiles risked collateral damage to nearby buildings. Alina studied the terrain, calculated angles and distances, and found the solution. A gun run from the northeast would put her flight path perpendicular to both the Rangers and the civilian structures. The bunker would be exposed for exactly 3 seconds during her approach, a tiny window of vulnerability. But 3 seconds was enough. She briefed her wingman, coordinated with the forward air controller, and rolled in. The approach was technical and demanding. She had to thread a needle at 400 knots while accounting for wind, terrain, and the absolute requirement for precision. No margin for error, no second chances. Alina centered the gun cross on the bunker entrance and pressed the trigger. 40 rounds of 30mm hate. The bunker entrance collapsed. The machine gun fell silent. The Rangers exploited the opening immediately, assaulting through the position before the enemy could recover. Within minutes, the compound was secure, the wounded were being evacuated, and the mission was complete. The Ranger platoon leader's voice came through the tactical frequency. Hawkeye 2-1, Falcon 6, I don't know how you made that shot, but you just saved 5 of my men. We are deeply in your debt. Alina's response was professional. Falcon 6, Hawkeye, just doing the job. Stay safe out there. But inside, she felt the familiar satisfaction of competence recognized. This was what she trained for. This was what the Air Force had tried to take from her. And this was what she'd reclaimed through skill and determination. Back at Kandahar, Wade was waiting in the operations center when she landed. Volkov, that bunker shot, I reviewed the gun camera footage. The margin for error was less than 10 feet. 1 degree off and you would have either missed the target or hit the Rangers. How did you calculate that approach? Alina shrugged. Math, sir, physics, and a lot of practice. Wade smiled. No, it wasn't just math, it was judgment. The kind of judgment that separates adequate pilots from exceptional ones. You made a high-risk decision under pressure and executed it perfectly. That's what I need in my flight leads. He handed her a folder. Effective immediately, you're cleared for 2-ship flight lead responsibilities. After 50 combat hours, we'll evaluate you for 4-ship flight lead. Questions? No, sir. Good, because I've got another tasking for you tomorrow. Intelligence reports a high-value target moving through Sangin. If confirmed, we'll need precision strikes in an urban environment. I'm assigning you as backup flight lead. Be ready. Alina took the folder and headed to the squadron-ready room to review the mission materials. On the way, she passed Brooks, who nodded in approval. Heard about the bunker shot. Nice work. Just got lucky with the geometry. Luck is what happens when skill meets opportunity. You're building a reputation, Volkov. People are noticing. The next 6 weeks confirmed what Brooks had said. Alina flew 53 combat sorties, accumulating combat hours faster than any pilot in the squadron. She became known for precision under pressure, for finding solutions when the situation looked impossible, for bringing everyone home safe. The other pilots started requesting her as their flight lead. Ground commanders started asking for her by call sign, and Wade started assigning her the missions that required absolute perfection, the missions that would end careers if they went wrong. One such mission came in early evening, when the operational tempo should have been winding down. Instead, Wade called an emergency briefing for all available pilots. The intelligence was fresh and credible. A high-value Taliban commander was meeting with his subordinates in a compound in Sangin. The opportunity to eliminate him was time-sensitive. The meeting would last maybe 2 hours, and then he'd disappear into the mountains for months. The problem was that the compound was in the middle of a densely populated neighborhood. Civilian structures on 3 sides, a school 50 meters to the east, a market 70 meters to the west, the kind of target that required surgical precision or risked international incident. Wade looked around the briefing room and his eyes settled on Alina. Volkov, your flight lead, pick your wingman and develop the strike plan. You've got 30 minutes before launch. Alina didn't hesitate. Tors. You're with me. Tors nodded and followed her to the mission planning area. They pulled up satellite imagery, studied the compound layout, and calculated approach vectors. The solution wasn't obvious. The compound was small, maybe 40 meters square, surrounded by structures that absolutely could not be hit. A missile strike risked collateral damage. A gun run risked errant rounds walking into civilian areas. Alina studied the imagery and found the answer in an unlikely place, the compound's courtyard. It was open to the sky, approximately 15 meters square, with walls on all sides that would contain blast effects. If she could put a single Maverick missile into that courtyard with perfect precision, the walls would channel the blast downward and inward. The commander and his subordinates would be eliminated. The surrounding structures would be protected, but the margin for error was measured in feet. 1 meter off target and the missile would hit a wall or overshoot into civilian territory. Tors saw the same solution and understood the risk. Boss, that's threading a needle from 3 miles away. The Maverick's accuracy is good, but not that good, not with absolute certainty. Then we'll make it certain. I'll make 2 passes, first pass for target familiarization and confirmation, second pass for the strike. You'll be high cover in case anything goes wrong. Tors studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's brief Wade. Wade listened to the plan with his characteristic intensity. When Alina finished, he asked a single question. "What's your confidence level?" "90%, sir." "And the 10% risk? Collateral damage to civilian structures, possible civilian casualties." Wade was silent for several seconds. Then, "This is exactly the kind of target that wins wars, but it's also the kind that ends careers if it goes wrong. I need to know you understand that." "I understand, sir." "And you still want to take the shot?" Alina met his eyes. "Sir, if we pass on this because we're worried about our careers instead of worried about the mission, we've already failed. I can make this shot. Let me prove it." Wade nodded slowly. "Approved. But Volkov don't miss." The flight to Sangin took 25 minutes. Alina used the time to visualize the attack sequence, running through the procedures in her mind until they were automatic. Muscle memory and mental preparation combined. Sangin at dusk was a landscape of shadows and amber light. The town sprawled along the Helmand River, a mix of compounds and markets and narrow streets that had seen decades of conflict. Somewhere down there, a Taliban commander was planning operations that would kill Americans. Alina's job was to make sure he never left that compound. Reaper 9, this is Ironside 6. Target compound is the two-story structure at grid 349872. Confirm visual. Alina found it immediately on her targeting display. The satellite imagery had been accurate, a small compound with the distinctive open courtyard in the center. Through her targeting pod, she could see heat signatures inside, multiple personnel, no civilians visible in the immediate vicinity. Ironside 6, Reaper 9, I've got the compound. Making my familiarization pass now. She flew over the target at 8,000 feet, the targeting pod locked on the compound. The courtyard was exactly as briefed, 15 meters square, surrounded by walls open to the sky. The heat signatures were concentrated in the main building but would likely move to the courtyard when the missile struck. That was acceptable. The Taliban commander would die regardless. Alina climbed back to altitude and armed a single Maverick missile. The seeker head tracked the courtyard with computer precision. She waited for perfect acquisition. The tone sounded in her headset, solid lock, no drift, optimal parameters. Ironside 6, Reaper 9, I'm rolling in hot. All personnel stand clear. The missile dropped off the rail and ignited, its contrail marking a straight line from aircraft to target. Alina watched through the targeting pod, her breath held. The Maverick struck the center of the courtyard with the precision of divine intervention. The explosion was contained exactly as she'd calculated, walls channeling the blast downward, minimal overpressure escaping beyond the compound perimeter. Textbook, perfect, surgical. Ironside 6, Reaper 9, target destroyed, assessing battle damage now. Through the targeting pod, Alina could see the compound in infrared. The main building was partially collapsed. The courtyard was a crater, no heat signatures moving. The intelligence would need to be confirmed by ground forces, but based on the strike results, no one in that compound had survived. Tor's voice came through on the flight frequency. "Boss, that was a hell of a shot." "Just math and physics, Reaper 8. No, that was art." The flight back to Kandahar was quiet. Alina processed the mission in the analytical way that pilots learn to compartmentalize violence. She just killed multiple human beings with a single button press. That was the job. That was the responsibility, and that was the burden that came with wearing the uniform. She didn't feel guilt. She felt the weight of authority and the knowledge that every decision she made carried consequences measured in lives saved or lost. When Alpha Flight landed at Kandahar, a small crowd had gathered near the operations center. Word had spread about the Sangin strike. Wade was waiting at the bottom of the crew ladder when Alina climbed down. "Volkov, intelligence confirms you killed the target and 3 of his senior commanders. 0 collateral damage, 0 civilian casualties. The kind of strike that gets written about in doctrine manuals." Alina nodded, unsure how to respond. Wade continued. "More importantly, you took a high-risk mission and executed it with perfect precision under pressure. That's the definition of excellence." He handed her another folder. "I'm recommending you for 4-ship flight lead responsibilities. Immediate approval, you've earned it." For the first time in 2 years, Alina felt something like vindication. not because of the promotion or the recognition, but because the system that had tried to break her had failed. Competence had won. The weeks that followed were a blur of missions and briefings, and the peculiar exhaustion that came from operating at maximum intensity for extended periods. Alina led four-ship formations into some of the most dangerous airspace in Afghanistan. She coordinated strikes with Special Forces teams conducting raids deep in Taliban territory. She flew rescue missions for downed pilots and provided cover for medevac helicopters extracting casualties under fire. Every mission added to her reputation. Every successful strike reinforced what everyone in the squadron already knew. Alina Volkov was the best A-10 pilot in theater, not the best female pilot. The best pilot, period. But reputation came with cost. The missions got harder. The risks increased. And the weight of responsibility grew heavier with every life that depended on her judgment. 3 months into her assignment at Kandahar, Alina was called to Wade's office for what she assumed was a routine briefing. Instead, she found Wade sitting with Colonel Chen, the wing commander. Both of them looked serious. "Captain Volkov, have a seat." Chen pulled up a tactical map on the wall display. "We've got a situation developing in the Korangal Valley. A Special Forces team conducting reconnaissance was ambushed approximately 3 hours ago. They're pinned down in terrain that makes extraction nearly impossible. 2 medevac attempts have been turned back by ground fire. An Apache was damaged and forced to divert. We need someone who can establish air superiority over the valley and keep it while we get those men out." Alina studied the map. The Korangal Valley was a legend in the military, a place so dangerous it had earned the nickname the Valley of Death. Steep mountains, limited approach vectors. An enemy that knew every inch of terrain and how to use it. What's the enemy force estimate? At least 50 fighters, probable MA and PADS, confirmed heavy machine guns and mortars. They've had 3 hours to fortify and they know help is coming. Wade leaned forward. "Volkov, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This is the most dangerous mission we'll ask you to fly. You'll be operating alone because we can't risk multiple aircraft in that valley. You'll have limited support because everything that can be spared is already committed. And you'll be facing an enemy that's dug in and waiting." Alina processed the information without emotion. The Korangal Valley, alone, against an entrenched enemy that had already turned back multiple rescue attempts. The kind of mission that defined careers or ended them. "When do I launch?" Chen and Wade exchanged glances. Chen spoke. "You don't have to take this mission, Captain. We can find another pilot, someone with more experience in this specific terrain." Alina shook her head. "With respect, ma'am, if I'm the best option, then I'm the best option. Those men don't care about my experience or my comfort level. They care about whether someone can get them out. So when do I launch?" Wade pulled up a mission timeline. "You've got 45 minutes to plan and brief. The Special Forces team has about 2 hours of ammunition remaining. After that, they'll be overrun. Your mission is to establish control over the valley, suppress enemy fire, and hold until the extraction helicopters can get in. No time limit. You stay on station until those men are safe or your Winchester and bingo fuel." Alina stood. "I'll be ready in 30. She walked to the Squadron Operations Center and pulled up everything available on the Korangal Valley. Satellite imagery, previous mission reports, terrain analysis, enemy tactics. The picture that emerged was grim. The valley was a natural fortress. Steep ridgelines on both sides created a natural funnel that exposed aircraft to fire from multiple angles. The approach vectors were limited and predictable, and the enemy had years of experience shooting at American aircraft. But Alina had spent her entire career preparing for exactly this kind of problem. The mission wasn't impossible, it was just hard. And hard was what she did. She reviewed her aircraft loadout, full combat load of ammunition, 6 Mavericks, 2 rocket pods, enough to fight for 90 minutes if she was efficient, maybe 2 hours if she was perfect. And she intended to be perfect. The briefing took 10 minutes. Alina walked Wade and Chen through her plan with clinical precision. Multiple attack vectors to prevent predictability, constant maneuvering to complicate enemy targeting, prioritization of heavy weapons and MANPADS threats, conservation of ammunition without sacrificing effectiveness. When she finished, Chen asked the only question that mattered. Confidence level, 95%, ma'am. And the 5%. Random luck. Enemy gets a golden BB hit. Something breaks on the aircraft. Variables I can't control. Chen nodded. Acceptable risk. You're cleared to launch, and Volkov bring those men home. Alina walked to her aircraft through twilight that was fading into darkness. Night missions were more dangerous but offered better concealment. The enemy couldn't shoot what they couldn't see clearly. Master Sergeant Williams was waiting by the aircraft. Captain, she's ready. All systems green. Full defensive suite loaded. Flares, chaff, the works. Alina conducted her pre-flight inspection by muscle memory, her mind already in the valley. Then she climbed into the cockpit and became part of the machine. The flight to the Korangal Valley took 40 minutes through darkness that was absolute. No moon, no ambient light, just the instruments and the hum of the engines and Alina's breathing steady in her oxygen mask. 5 miles out, she established contact with the Special Forces team. The radio call sign was Dagger 7, and the voice that responded was controlled but underlaid with fatigue and pain. Reaper 9, Dagger 7 actual. We are pinned down at grid reference 274936. Taking effective fire from 3 sides. We have 2 urgent casualties and ammunition is critical. How copy? Solid copy, Dagger 7. I've got your position. Describe your tactical situation. The team leader's report was professional despite the chaos Alina could hear in the background. Approximately 50 enemy fighters. Positions on both ridgelines and blocking the valley exit. Heavy machine guns, RPGs, and at least 1 sniper team. 2 attempted rescues already turned back. The situation was deteriorating. Alina studied the valley through her targeting pod. Even in infrared, it looked like a nightmare. The Special Forces team was clustered behind whatever cover they could find in the valley floor. Enemy positions dotted the ridgelines like malevolent stars. This wasn't going to be a quick strike. This was going to be a sustained fight. Dagger 7, Reaper 9, I'm rolling in. Keep your heads down and trust me. We're getting you out. Alina armed her cannon and selected the first target, a heavy machine gun position on the eastern ridgeline that was pouring fire into the team's position. She rolled inverted and pulled, diving into the valley. The approach was technical and dangerous. The valley walls limited her maneuvering space. The darkness limited visibility. And somewhere down there, an enemy with MANPADS was tracking her heat signature. But fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Alina centered the gun cross and pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 spoke and the machine gun position disintegrated. She pulled up hard, banking away from the valley walls while simultaneously dispensing flares to confuse any heat-seeking missiles. The cockpit lit up with threat warnings. Radar lock, missile launch, MANPADS. Alina reacted without thinking, braking hard left while dispensing more flares. The missile passed 50 feet to her right, drawn away by the countermeasures. Close. Too close, but she was still flying. Dagger 7, Reaper 9, Splash 1, continuing attacks. For the next hour, Alina fought the valley. She struck machine gun nests, eliminated sniper hides, destroyed mortar positions. Every attack run was a calculated risk. Every pull-up was a gamble that the enemy wouldn't land a lucky shot. The A-10 took hits. Small arms fire stitching the wings. An RPG passing close enough that she felt the concussion. But the titanium bathtub around the cockpit held. The redundant systems kept functioning, and Alina kept fighting. The Special Forces team used the suppression to consolidate their position and prepare for extraction. Dagger 7's voice came through the radio periodically, professional despite the circumstances. Reaper 9, you're keeping us alive. Extraction birds are inbound, ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. Alina checked her ammunition. 200 rounds remaining in the cannon. 3 Mavericks. 1 rocket pod. Enough to finish the job if she was smart about it. The enemy had learned that standing and fighting meant death. They'd gone to ground, waiting for her to leave so they could finish what they'd started. But Alina wasn't leaving. She orbited the valley at 4,000 feet, her targeting pod scanning constantly for any sign of enemy movement. When fighters tried to reposition, she hit them with precise bursts of cannon fire. When they tried to mass for an assault, she broke up their formations with mavericks. The valley became her personal domain, her area of responsibility, and nothing moved there without her permission. The extraction helicopters appeared on her display, two Black Hawks flying low and fast. Alina coordinated their approach, establishing a safe corridor while simultaneously suppressing any enemy positions that could threaten them. The helicopters landed in a cloud of dust, and the Special Forces team moved with desperate speed. Casualties first, equipment second, everyone accounted for. The whole evolution took 90 seconds. Then the Black Hawks lifted off and accelerated away from the valley, carrying 12 men who'd been hours away from death. Reaper 9, Dagger 7, we are clear of the objective area. I don't have words for what you just did. You gave us hope when we had none, and you kept us alive through sheer skill and courage. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it. Alina's response was quiet. Dagger 7, Reaper 9, it was an honor to fight for you. Get home safe. She climbed out of the valley and turned toward Kandahar. Her fuel gauges were reading critical. Her ammunition counters were reading empty. And her aircraft had taken enough damage that the maintenance crews would spend the next 12 hours making repairs. But everyone had come home. The mission was complete. When Alina landed at Kandahar, the entire squadron was waiting. Not just the pilots, but the maintenance crews, the support staff, everyone who understood what she'd just accomplished. They didn't cheer. That would have been inappropriate, but they watched her taxi in with the kind of respect that couldn't be spoken. Wade was waiting when she shut down the engines. Volkov, that was the most impressive display of combat aviation I've witnessed in 23 years. You held that valley alone for over an hour against 50 enemy fighters. You took multiple hits and kept fighting. And you brought everyone home. He paused, his expression serious. I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross, and I'm recommending you for upgrade to instructor pilot status. You're not just competent anymore, you're exceptional, and we need to share that with the next generation. The recognition should have felt like victory. Instead, Alina felt exhausted. Not physically, adrenaline was still keeping her upright, but emotionally. The weight of responsibility, the knowledge that 12 men were alive because of decisions she'd made in fractions of seconds, the burden of authority that came with being trusted with life and death. She sat in the squadron ready room after the debriefing, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, and tried to process everything that had happened. 6 months ago, she'd been flying cargo runs and wondering if she'd ever get another chance. Now she was being recommended for one of the Air Force's highest decorations for valor. The journey felt surreal. Brooks sat down next to her. You all right? Just tired. Bullshit, you're processing. I recognize the signs. Want to talk about it? Alina considered deflecting. But Brooks had been there, had flown the same missions, faced the same choices, carried the same weight. I almost got hit by that MANPADS, maybe 50 feet. If the missile had been a fraction more accurate or if my flares had been a second slower, I'd be dead. And those 12 men would probably be dead too. The margin was that thin. Brooks nodded. Welcome to combat aviation. Every mission is like that. We just pretend it isn't because pretending makes it survivable. But yeah, the margins are always thin. That's why we train. That's why we prepare. And that's why we trust each other. But what if I'd made the wrong call? What if I'd missed a target or miscalculated an approach? What if— Stop. Brooks's voice was firm but not unkind. You can what if yourself into paralysis, but you didn't miss. You didn't miscalculate. You flew a perfect mission under impossible conditions and saved 12 lives. That's the reality. The rest is just fear talking. Alina took a breath. Does it get easier? No, but you get better at carrying it. And you learn to trust that your training and experience will get you through the next mission. That's all any of us can do. The conversation helped. Not because it solved anything, but because it reminded Alina that she wasn't alone. Every pilot in the squadron carried the same weight. Every mission was a test of skill and judgment and sometimes luck. And somehow they all kept flying. The next morning, Wade called her back to his office. Colonel Chen was there again, along with someone Alina didn't recognize, a one-star general with a chest full of decorations. Wade made introductions. Captain Volkov, this is Brigadier General Marcus Thompson. He's the air operations commander for the entire theater. Thompson studied Alina with the frank assessment of someone who'd spent decades evaluating pilots. "Captain, I've been reviewing your mission reports. The Bagram rescue, the Sangin strike, and yesterday's action in the Korangal Valley. That's 3 months of sustained excellence under the most demanding conditions. The kind of performance that doesn't happen by accident." Thompson pulled up a chair and sat, his posture relaxed but his eyes intense. "Captain Volkov, I'm here because we have a problem. A good problem, but a problem nonetheless. You've become the pilot that everyone requests. Ground commanders ask for you by call sign. Other pilots want to fly your wing. And your mission success rate is statistically abnormal. 98% mission effectiveness with 0 friendly casualties. That's not normal. That's exceptional." Alina wasn't sure how to respond. Thompson continued, "Here's the situation. We're 6 months into a new operational strategy that relies heavily on precision close air support. We need pilots who can operate independently in complex environments with minimal supervision. Based on your performance, you're exactly what we need. But we also need to replicate that performance across the entire theater, which means we need you to teach." He handed her a folder. "I'm offering you a position at the weapons school. Instructor pilot. Your job would be to take the best pilots the Air Force has and make them better, to codify the tactics you've developed into doctrine that can be taught, to ensure that your level of excellence becomes the standard, not the exception." Alina opened the folder and scanned the orders. Nellie's Air Force Base, the weapons school, the most prestigious assignment in tactical aviation, the place where legends were made. It was everything she'd ever wanted, and she felt nothing. Thompson noticed her hesitation. "This isn't a punishment or a lateral move. This is recognition that you've mastered your craft to the point where your greatest value is teaching others. But I also know you love flying combat missions. So I need to know, are you willing to leave the fight to train the next generation of fighters?" Alina looked at Wade. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She turned back to Thompson. "Sir, with respect, I didn't spend 2 years in exile just to walk away from combat the moment I proved myself. I appreciate the recognition, but I'm not ready to leave." Thompson nodded slowly. "I understand, but let me ask you this. How many lives did you save in the Korangal Valley?" 12. "Now imagine if there were 50 pilots with your skills. Imagine how many lives could be saved if we could replicate your level of excellence across the entire Air Force. That's the calculation I'm asking you to consider. Not what makes you happy, but what serves the mission." The argument was compelling and infuriating, because Alina knew he was right. She also knew that accepting this assignment would mean leaving the flying she loved, trading the cockpit for the classroom, becoming part of the system instead of the sharp edge of the spear. But maybe that was the price of competence. Maybe when you proved yourself exceptional, the responsibility expanded beyond personal satisfaction to institutional improvement. She closed the folder and met Thompson's eyes. "I'll do it, but I have one condition." "Name it." "I maintain currency in the A-10. I fly combat missions during breaks in the training schedule. I don't become a full-time instructor who forgets what real combat feels like." Thompson smiled. "Done. The weapons school encourages instructor pilots to maintain tactical currency. You'll have plenty of opportunity to fly, just not as your primary duty." He stood and offered his hand. "Welcome to the next phase of your career, Captain. I think you're going to find it more rewarding than you expect." After Thompson left, Wade closed the door and looked at Alina with something that might have been pride. "You made the right choice. I know it doesn't feel that way right now. But the Air Force needs people like you in positions where they can influence the future. Not just execute the mission, but shape how we execute all missions." Alina nodded, still processing. "When do I report?" 30 days. Finish your deployment rotation, conduct turnover with your replacement, and then you're released to Nellie's. Make the most of these last few weeks. You've earned them." The final 30 days at Kandahar passed quickly. Alina flew 16 more combat missions, each one adding to the legend that was already forming around her call sign. She mentored younger pilots, sharing the hard-won lessons that had kept her alive. and she said goodbye to the squadron that had welcomed her back to combat and trusted her with their most difficult missions. On her last night at Kandahar, the squadron threw her an informal farewell. No speeches or formal ceremonies, just pilots gathering to acknowledge one of their own moving on. Torres raised his glass. To Reaper 9, who proved that competence beats politics, who showed us what excellence looks like, and who saved more lives in 6 months than most of us will in our entire careers. The squadron drank. Alina felt the weight of their respect and recognition. It was worth more than any medal or decoration. These were her people. They understood. The flight back to the United States was long and gave Alina time to think. She was returning to a country that didn't understand what happened in places like Afghanistan, returning to a system that had tried to break her but had ultimately failed, and returning to a role that would require her to transform from operator to educator. The challenge ahead was different than flying combat missions, but maybe it was more important. At Nelly's Air Force Base, the weapons school was exactly what Alina expected: intensity and excellence compressed into an institution. The instructors were the best pilots the Air Force had produced. The students were already top performers in their squadrons. The curriculum was designed to take excellence and refine it to perfection. Alina reported to the commandant, a colonel named Mitchell who'd flown combat in 3 different wars. He reviewed her file with the thoroughness of someone who'd read it multiple times already. Captain Volkov, your combat record speaks for itself, but teaching is different than operating. It requires patience, adaptability, and the ability to communicate complex concepts to people who might not learn the way you do. Think you're up for it. Alina met his eyes. Sir, I've spent the last 6 months learning that competence isn't enough. You also need to be able to explain why you're competent, what decisions you made and why, what alternatives you considered, what risks you accepted. I've been teaching without realizing it. This just makes it formal. Mitchell smiled slightly. Good answer. Your first class of students reports in 2 weeks. They're all experienced pilots, all top performers, all convinced they're already excellent. Your job is to show them that excellence has levels they haven't imagined yet. Questions? Just one, sir. Am I allowed to be honest with them? I'm requiring you to be honest with them. These aren't fragile egos that need to be protected. These are warriors who need to know the truth about their capabilities. Sugarcoating doesn't save lives. Honesty does. The first class consisted of 8 pilots from different squadrons. Alina studied their files and saw younger versions of herself, confident, skilled, and convinced they had nothing left to learn. The first day of instruction was designed to shatter that confidence, not through criticism or humiliation, but through demonstration of what true excellence looked like. Alina took them through mission scenarios that had no obvious solutions, tactical problems that required creativity and judgment, engagement profiles that demanded perfection. She flew the scenarios herself first, showing them how it was done. The pilots watched in silence as she executed maneuvers they'd thought impossible, as she found solutions they hadn't considered, as she demonstrated the level of mastery that separated competence from excellence. After the demonstration, one of the students, a captain named Reynolds, raised his hand. How did you calculate that approach angle? The terrain clearance was inside our standard minimums. Alina pulled up the tactical display. I didn't calculate it in the moment. I knew it because I'd studied the terrain before the mission. I'd visualized the approach. I'd considered alternatives. When the moment came to execute, I wasn't making it up. I was implementing a plan I'd already developed. She looked at the class. That's the difference between adequate and exceptional. Adequate pilots react to situations. Exceptional pilots prepare for situations. By the time you're in the cockpit, every decision should already be made. You're just executing. The next 6 months were exhausting. Alina taught tactics, weapons employment, mission planning, and threat assessment. But more importantly, she taught judgment, how to evaluate risk, how to make decisions under pressure, how to balance mission requirements against safety concerns. She was demanding, she was uncompromising. She accepted no excuses and tolerated no shortcuts. Her students struggled. Some days they hated her. Some days they questioned whether they belonged at the weapons school. But slowly, gradually, They began to understand what she was teaching them. They began to see the levels of excellence they'd never imagined. They began to transform from competent pilots into exceptional ones. By the end of their training, Alina's first class graduated with the highest marks in weapons school history. Every student passed, every student improved dramatically, and every student understood that excellence was a choice, not an accident. Mitchell called Alina to his office after the graduation ceremony. "Captain Volkov, I've been running this school for 4 years. I've seen a lot of instructors, good ones, great ones. But I've never seen someone who could consistently produce this level of improvement in students. You've got a gift for teaching." Alina shook her head. "It's not a gift, sir. It's just refusing to accept anything less than excellence from myself, from my students, from the Air Force." "That's exactly what I mean. You hold people to a standard they didn't know existed, and then you show them how to reach it. That's rare." He handed her another folder. "I'm recommending you for promotion to major, and I'm recommending you for retention as a senior instructor at the weapons school. The Air Force needs people like you in positions where they can shape the future. What do you say?" Alina opened the folder and read the recommendation. It was everything she'd worked for: recognition, authority, the ability to influence how the Air Force fought. But it was also a continuation of the path away from combat, away from the cockpit, toward administration and policy. She closed the folder. "Sir, I appreciate the recognition, but I need to ask a question. If I stay here training instructors and refining doctrine, am I serving the mission, or am I serving the institution?" Mitchell leaned back. "That's a more complicated question than you think. Sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes they're not. What do you believe?" Alina thought about the Marines at Bagram, the Rangers in the Korangal Valley, the Special Forces team that would have died if she hadn't been there. "I believe competence matters at the point of contact. Having the best doctrine in the world doesn't help if the pilots implementing it aren't skilled enough. So yes, training matters, but actual combat experience also matters. And I'm worried that if I stay here too long, I'll forget what it feels like to be in the fight." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Then here's what I propose. You do 1 more year as an instructor, train 2 more classes. Codify your tactics into doctrine that can be taught across the Air Force, and then you rotate back to a combat squadron, best of both worlds." It was a compromise, but it was also practical. Alina extended her hand. "Deal, sir." The next year passed quickly. Alina trained 2 more classes of pilots, each one reaching the same high standards as the first. She wrote tactical publications that were distributed across the Air Force. She gave presentations at conferences and briefed senior leadership on close air support doctrine. And she maintained her currency in the A-10, flying training missions and refining her skills. By the end of that year, Alina Volkov had transformed from a competent pilot who'd been punished for excellence into a recognized authority on tactical aviation. Her name was known throughout the Air Force. Her tactics were being taught at every level, and her influence was shaping how an entire generation of pilots would approach combat. But she never forgot where she'd come from, never forgot the 2 years of exile, never forgot the Marines who needed help at Bagram or the Rangers who'd been pinned down in the Korangal Valley. Because ultimately, all the doctrine and training and recognition meant nothing if pilots couldn't perform when lives were on the line. The final mission came unexpectedly. Alina was finishing her last week at the weapons school when Mitchell called her with an urgent request. "Volkov, we've got an emergency situation developing. A civilian airliner has been hijacked over the Pacific. Communications suggest terrorists planning to crash it into a populated area. F-16s have been scrambled to intercept, but command needs an experienced pilot to coordinate the tactical response and potentially make the call on whether to shoot it down. You available?" Alina didn't hesitate. "I'm available." "Good. You leave in 30 minutes. A transport will take you to the command aircraft coordinating the response. Your job is to provide tactical expertise and help the command authority make the right decision. This is going to be ugly, Volkov. No good options, just varying degrees of bad." The flight to the command aircraft took 2 hours. Alina spent the time reviewing hijacking protocols and intercept procedures. By the time she arrived, the situation had evolved. The hijacked airliner was 400 miles from the coast, heading directly toward Los Angeles. 230 passengers, 4 hijackers, and a timeline that suggested impact in less than 3 hours. The command aircraft was an E-3 Sentry, an airborne command and control platform. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Military officers, intelligence analysts, and civilian authorities were all monitoring different aspects of the crisis. Alina reported to the tactical director, a colonel named Santos. "Captain Volkov, thank God you're here. We've got 2 F-16s shadowing the airliner, but we need to make a decision soon. The hijackers have indicated they'll crash the plane into downtown Los Angeles if their demands aren't met, and their demands are impossible to meet, which means we're probably going to have to shoot down an airliner with 230 civilians aboard." Santos pulled up the tactical display. "I've flown fighters. I've coordinated combat operations, but I've never had to make this kind of decision. Shoot down Americans to save other Americans. I need your expertise." Alina studied the display. The airliner was at 35,000 feet, traveling at standard speed. The F-16s were in trail formation, ready to execute on command. The timeline to Los Angeles was 2 hours 40 minutes. The tactical situation was clear. The moral situation was impossible. Alina spent the next hour evaluating alternatives. Could the F-16s force the airliner to land? Not without cooperation from the pilots. Could special operations forces board the aircraft mid-flight? Not at this altitude. Could the hijackers be negotiated with? Intelligence said no. They were committed to their course of action. Every alternative led back to the same conclusion. Either shoot down the airliner over the ocean, killing 230 civilians, or allow it to crash into Los Angeles, potentially killing thousands. The trolley problem made real. "Colonel Santos, I need to speak with the F-16 pilots directly." Santos established the radio link. Alina introduced herself and explained the situation. The lead F-16 pilot was a major named Kowalski. His voice was steady, but Alina could hear the strain underneath. "Ma'am, I understand the mission, but I need you to know that if I receive the order to shoot, I'm firing on an aircraft full of American civilians. That's going to stay with me forever. So before that order comes, I need confirmation that there's no other option, that we've exhausted every alternative." Alina respected him for asking. "Major Kowalski, I've reviewed every alternative. There's nothing else we can do. If that airliner reaches the coast, it will kill thousands. If we shoot it down now, we save those thousands at the cost of 230. It's a terrible calculation, but it's the only calculation we have." Kowalski was silent for several seconds. Then, "Understood, ma'am. Standing by for orders." The final decision fell to a 3-star general who'd been monitoring from the Pentagon. Alina briefed him on the situation, the alternatives, and the recommendation. The general listened without interruption. When she finished, he asked a single question. "Captain Volkov, if this was your decision, what would you order?" Alina took a breath. "Sir, I would order the shoot-down now, before the airliner gets closer to the coast. Every mile we wait increases the risk that debris will hit populated areas. The decision is terrible, but delay makes it worse." The general nodded. "Concur. Execute the mission." Santos transmitted the order to the F-16s. Alina listened to the radio traffic, professional and controlled despite the enormity of what was happening. "Viper 1-1, you are authorized weapons free. Engage hostile aircraft." Viper 1-1 copies, engaging. The F-16s fired missiles from beyond visual range. The airliner disintegrated at 35,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean, killing everyone aboard instantly. 230 civilians, 4 hijackers, 0 survivors. The command aircraft fell silent. No one spoke. No one moved. They just participated in the death of Americans. The justification was clear. The mathematics were undeniable, but the weight was crushing. Alina sat at her station and felt the burden of authority. She'd made recommendations that resulted in death. The civilians on that airliner hadn't chosen to be in this situation, but they died because someone, Alina, had advised that their deaths would save more lives. The trolley problem made real, and the weight was unbearable. Hours later, after the operation ended and the formal debriefings were complete, Alina sat alone in a quiet office at Nellie's and tried to process what had happened. The decision had been correct. The alternatives had been exhausted. The mathematics were clear, but correctness didn't ease the weight. Brooks found her there, sitting in darkness. "I heard what happened. You okay?" Alina didn't answer immediately. Finally, "I recommended killing 230 people to save thousands. And I'd make the same recommendation again because it was right. But does being right make it better?" Brooks sat down. "No, being right just means you can live with yourself. It doesn't make it easier, and anyone who says otherwise is lying. How do you carry it? You don't. You just learn to function despite it. You remember that the alternative was worse. And you trust that when the next impossible decision comes, you'll have the strength to make it again." They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the Nevada desert was dark and quiet. Somewhere, families were learning that their loved ones had died on a hijacked airliner. And somewhere else, thousands of people in Los Angeles had no idea how close they'd come to disaster. The weight of authority, the burden of responsibility, the cost of competence. Alina understood now why excellence demanded so much. Why the Air Force had tried to break her when she'd shown she was better than her commanders. Why Wade had pushed her so hard. Why Thompson had wanted her to teach. Because true excellence wasn't about skill. It was about judgment, about making impossible decisions and living with the consequences, about carrying weight that would crush most people and still being able to function the next day. A week later, Alina received new orders. Assignment to a combat squadron. Back to flying missions. Back to the work she loved. But she was different now. Not broken, but changed. Refined by experience and responsibility into something harder and more durable. On her last day at Nellie's, Mitchell walked her to her car. "Volkov, you've done more in 18 months than most pilots do in entire careers. You've saved lives, trained the next generation, and made decisions that will haunt you forever. I'm not sure whether to thank you or apologize." Alina smiled slightly. "Just tell me I did good work." "You did exceptional work, the kind that defines what we aspire to be. Now go back to combat and keep doing it." Alina drove away from Nellie's toward a future that was uncertain but purposeful. She'd proven herself. She'd survived exile and emerged stronger. She'd demonstrated that competence could overcome politics. And she'd learned that excellence demanded everything. But she'd also learned something more important, that the weight was worth it, that the burden was justified by the lives saved. That the cost of authority was acceptable when the alternative was abandoning the people who needed you most. She was Captain Alina Volkov, call sign Reaper 9, and she was ready for whatever came next.